First of all, this is Ngunnawal country. I'm not from this area. I'm descended from the Bulkanwara, which is Western Allenji people in far north Queensland. Thank you all for being here today. Also, I'd like to acknowledge all the Aboriginal people who've sort of travelled from all over parts of Australia to be here for Ninti One's celebrations. Look, I'm going to kick off this little talk about tourism by posing a bit of a question on you all. I want you to bring to mind what you think about Aboriginal people and tourism, as in what comes to mind when you think about that. Now, I want you to hold on to that thought, you know, as I'm talking through these bits and pieces, and we'll try and engage with that as we're going along. Look, I'm going to start off with a few little facts and figures about the sector overall, and specifically I'm going to show you a few things about the remote tourism sector. Now look, I don't expect you to be able to read all the finer details on this particular thing here. In this graph, we're looking at the 13 main remote tourism regions in the country. If anybody's concerned, that's not really how Australia is at the moment. You know, we just sort of put it that way for a bit of a representation. But look, the thing I want to draw your attention to on the chart is the clusterings there in the bottom. Now, we've got each of the 13 main regions, and we've looked at the domestic overnight and also international visitor numbers for these regions over that over the annual periods for that 4-year period. Domestic day visitors aren't included in these figures because some of the data available was not suitable to be used in this sort of chart. So we've just got the domestic overnight and the international. International figures are coloured in the bars and leaving the domestic overnight figures uncoloured in the thing. And you won't be able to notice it, but I can tell you there's only one of these regions out of all 13 where the international visitors are actually where the domestic visitors are outnumbered by the international visitors. And that's Lassiter, which is third from the right for you guys. And those who know, it's home to Uluru, it's home to Yolgas and those sort of places. Next one is another chart with a few nice bars and things. Again, I won't expect you to be able to read it from where you're seated there. Here we're looking at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participation in tourism, and what we've got for each of the bars on the thing there is the specific sector areas that each of the enterprises are involved in. We've got a whole range of different things there. We've got fishing charters, retail, even the ITOs there. What else have we got? I can't even read it from here. National parks and things like that. But look, over on your right-hand side is the two biggest columns. The largest one is cultural tours, and the one alongside it I've grouped together to call tourism tour inclusive. Those include tours, but as part of packages, so there's often a bit of accommodation sort of thrown in then as well. So what you can see, like, we do have a diverse range of participation by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in tourism overall, but by and large there's a very, very strong presence of the cultural side, which I term as Aboriginal tourism. With these factors in mind, we decided to approach the remote tourism project from using a particular collection of perspectives. And the first one on the top there is we have an overall objective to decolonise discourse about Aboriginal tourism. Now look, what that refers to is our project group and the way we're going about it. We have, well, I'm calling that we have 4 people in the project. Officially we only have 3 at the moment. We've already finished one of our honours students, but we have, in addition to her, there's been two PhD students and myself. 2 of those people are Aboriginal. So what this introduces is there's no such thing as the Aboriginal perspective in anything, but we are including some Aboriginal perspectives in the conduct of this research into Aboriginal tourism. Now, I'm based at Southern Cross Uni, as Steve said. Our students are based at, there's one at Uni SA, and there's also another one at Flinders University. One of the other ways we're approaching this work is to ask questions in a different kind of way. So, by innovative, we mean looking at tourism issues for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in a particular kind of way. So I've asked you to reflect on what tourism and Aboriginal people mean in your mind, and I'm going to take a stab and suggest that a lot of you would have came up with culture. Tourism would involve culture, and coupled with that, it would also involve a lot of international visitors as well. By and large, that's the common perception of what tourism is for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The view that we're taking in this project is slightly different. We're taking the view of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander involvement in tourism. That does include Aboriginal tourism, but then in the remote tourism in the remote context, we also include something called remote tourism as well, which introduces a much more diverse perspective and a lot more different kind of development and enterprise sort of opportunities. So the way we're approaching this work is to view tourism as a system. Remote tourism itself is part of much broader tourism systems, and on its own, it constitutes its own system as well. But look, we've had to recognise, like we did lit reviews and background studies and all of this sort of thing, and looked at what other agencies and things like that have been doing, and recognise that there's a lot of useful stuff available and out there for Aboriginal people already, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel on certain kinds of things. So we've decided to go about this project looking at various components of the system. So, example, entrepreneurship. Now, yes, there's been a fair bit done on that, but we're specifically looking in the remote context, particularly tourism on country. We're looking at issues like diversification, regional development, marketing. Now, we've got 2 sides of the coin there, and one is looking at international visitors, undertaken by one of our PhD students, a lady at Flinders University, and the other side of the coin is, of course, the domestic visitors, which has been carried out at Uni SA by our other PhD student. What other things have we got? Oh yes, of course, the one that I'm primarily interested in, reconciliation through tourism. So we've got a whole range of different things on our agenda. I'm not going to cover all of them today. I don't really have the time. I'll just focus on one of the projects that's already been completed, just to give you a little bit of a taste of the kind of things that are emerging from this work. Look, I've put the words long-term there as part of our approach to help describe the way we're going about the question of knowledge that we want to come out of this research. This focus is long term in as such, because we're mainly looking at knowledge for strategy, for planning, so that people can go about their tourism development and enterprise and initiatives in ways that use based on knowledge that's appropriate to their context and their particular needs. So it's not suggesting that there's a one-size-fits-all in remote tourism. That's not the case. There's localised issues, you know, in all areas. It's pretty well across the board. But the question of remote tourism has a set of challenges and issues attached to it. So we want to work towards developing a whole suite of knowledge that develops strategy and planning that can engage with that. And finally, the last one, collaborative. We're going about this work through consultation with small to medium remote Aboriginal tourism enterprise. And also, we're also linking in with other Ninti One projects as well. So I have a few discussions with Tim, who you just heard from, some of the other speakers that we also heard from this morning as well. Because the question of tourism, it crosses over all different areas of interest. So we've had to have various discussions with people about that sort of thing. Look, in regards to the output and impact for the project, like these are the kind of issues that we have to weigh up. I mean, obviously, small to medium Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander enterprises at the top of the list. They're our number one priority as we're putting together the projects. But in doing that, like I've already sort of hinted to before, is we're keeping present to the mind the issue of remote context and how we go about investigating these issues by keeping the challenges and issues, you know, a key part in how we go about all of the work. Another one, of course, is the relevance to the sector. Look, overall, the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander sector is relatively mature. However, based on our reviews on things like that, it is in a sort of a transition sort of phase. There's a few shifts in the way the whole question of tourism is being approached in a broader sense, but then also at the grassroots level as well. So we've been mindful of that and keep that in mind when we're putting together the projects. And also, of course, the broad stakeholder interest groups, those directly involved with Ninti One, but of course those also with sort of broader linkage with the tourism sector. And of course, relevance to theory. That's a bit of an interesting one, because when I talked about the, having that shift to not just looking at Aboriginal tourism, but also coupling that with remote tourism, opportunities for Aboriginal people, what that does is it opens the door for different kinds of theory to sort of be brought into the debate about tourism for blackfellas. So in a sense, there's a bit of a shift in mindset going on as well in the academy, but then also sort of on the ground and how we go about in developing the sector. Okay, so the work that our student did was with small remote entrepreneur. undertook that project collaboratively, as I've already indicated. So we went through steps of her being invited on country, that the participants were key drivers in carrying out that project. Even so much as down as them determining, how much was enough research engagement, which we were way out. They actually wanted more than what we thought was initially would be sufficient. So that involved being prepared to go back for an extra trip. It was on their terms, and that's the way we went about it. Being in a remote context, the issue of seasonality played a big role in how they went about sort of their overall initiative, because I won't specifically call it an enterprise. It was more better described as initiative, and the reason I can say that is this thing called diversification. So their involvement in tourism was not just one thing. It was a range of different things, and while we could sort of relate that to responding to a few different issues and conditions and things like that, the question of seasonality did figure pretty large in that. Basically, what seasonality means in tourism speak, I suppose, is that tourism season starts and then it ends, and there could be like 3-4 month gap where they're not going to get any visitors at all. So if these fellows want to stay on country, which is what they really want to do, the tourism initiative is a really big driving factor of remaining on their country, connected and all that sort of thing. Carrying out the obligations for the elders, which we've sort of noted there, and balanced obligation, all that sort of thing. Having a diversified approach to tourism seemed to be a very, very big part of ensuring that they can carry that out. Of course, I've sort of noted tourism on country and also the balanced obligation. I sort of hinted to that as well. Look, another important thing that came out of it was the importance of networking. And look, as a remote operator, there might be one enterprise there, another one over there, and that other mob is sort of over there type of thing. So these guys really valued a sense of interconnected with all the local enterprises. But they also placed a lot of emphasis on interconnectedness at a broader regional level, also at a broader state level, and then national level, and even an international level as well. Engaging with Indigenous brothers and sisters from countries overseas like Canada and all of those sort of places. And look, the last thing I'll quickly mention is this issue of growth capacity. Now look, in the deficit model, in the deficit way of thinking about issues for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, you might view growth capacity as something, issues from within, as in skills and all of those different sorts of things. Growth capacity for these guys was stifled more often than not by external sources. But before I wrap up, I was just going to bring us back to a few of the broader issues in relation to Aboriginal tourism and remote tourism overall. First is a few facts and figures about Aboriginal tourism itself. So I've mentioned sort of domestic tourists and international tourists. So 2009 figures is all of this stuff here. 2009, 71% of all Aboriginal tourism visitors were domestic, but that constituted less than 3% of overall domestic visitor activity. Look at international tourists there, the percentage of which Aboriginal tourists, about 29%. Annual trend for each one, domestics decline, about average 19% decline per year. Annual trend for international visitors, about a 4.95% decline per year. Getting onto the remote visitor stats as well. Look, I'm just going to sort of gloss through these really quick. Here we have a slight increase of domestic visitors. Look at that, about sort of 1.7% increase per year. Not bad. But then when we go to the international visitors, there's about a 5% decrease per year. Look, overall the figures for remote tourism aren't too glossy, really. So it raises the question of how relevant issues of strategic knowledge, planning knowledge, building local capacity, and engaging with overcoming the challenging context of remote tourism are for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. And I'm out of time. I am. Thank you very much.